My name is Kent Olson. I'm a member of Day Spring United Methodist Church in Tempe, Arizona. I'll be addressing why the economic aspects of inequality tell us we should care deeply about this issue. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, the ideologies of the priest and the Levite gave them the security of easy answers. They were so certain that they had the right answers, they felt no need to bother with asking questions about the condition of the injured outcast by the side of the road. All too often, our own ideologies give us the security of easy answers. Like the priest and the Levite, our ideologies can cause us to be oblivious to people in dire need. Certain that we have all the right answers, we don't see the realities that Jesus and the prophets were so willing and able to perceive. So let's stop and ask questions. Let's inquire about how the day-to-day lives of real people are being affected by increasing economic inequality. When we do that, we can see the difficult situation that millions of American families faced even well before the Great Recession hit. Back in 2003, bankruptcy experts made it clear that families with children were the primary casualties of financial stress. Here is what they found, even in that relatively prosperous time period. If you want to avoid bankruptcy, avoid having children. People who consistently rank in the worst financial trouble are united by one surprising characteristic. They are parents with children at home. Married couples with children are more than twice as likely to file for bankruptcy as their childless counterparts. A divorced woman raising a youngster is nearly 3 times more likely to file for bankruptcy than her single friend who never had children. A family with children is now 75% more likely to be late on credit card payments than a family with no children. Families with children are now more likely than anyone else to lose the roof over their heads. Motherhood has become the single best indicator that an unmarried woman will end up bankrupt. Since 1981, the number of single mothers going broke has gone up 600%. This year, that is, referring to the year 2003, an estimated 1.6 million children will go along for the ride when their parents declare bankruptcy. That means that more kids will be listed in their parents' bankruptcies than will sign up for Little League or get braces on their teeth. If current trends continue, by the end of the decade, 1 of every 7 children in the United States will have lived through their parents' bankruptcy. Unfortunately, inequality hasn't improved since those statistics were published over a decade ago. The Great Recession made things far worse, and the recovery has done little to make things better. In fact, the gains of the recovery have accrued overwhelmingly to the wealthiest Americans. For example, the wealthiest 1% of Americans gained 93% of the additional income created in the country in 2010. Here are some other more recent figures which should cause us to stop and think about what is going on in our economy. These statistics come from a number of leading economists. Between 2005 and 2009, the typical African American household lost 53% of its wealth, putting its assets at a mere 5% of the average white Americans. Today, almost a quarter of all children in the U.S. live in poverty. Warren Buffett, the second richest man in America in 2011, noted that his combined bill that year for income and payroll taxes came to a mere 17% of his income, a lower rate than that paid by any other 20 people who worked in his office. Recently, we've learned that the company-funded retirement funds of just 100 of the CEOs in our country exceed the retirement plan savings of over 41% of American families combined. Even the long-cherished American dream of upward mobility, the one hope that could still console us when confronting the ugly realities of poverty, is no longer a meaningful dream. It has become a cruel deception. There has been a collapse in upward mobility. In contrast to their parents and grandparents, children today in the U.S. have very little expectation of improving upon the condition into which they were born. In fact, the 1950s and 60s were the last period of rising intergenerational mobility in the United States. Only 6% of Americans born to parents with incomes in the lowest 20% of the income distribution ever make it to the top 20%. According to one economist, almost every comparably developed nation for which we have data offers greater income mobility than the United States. These dismal statistics reflect the results of increasing inequalities of wealth, income, and opportunity that have continued unabated over the course of an entire generation. A recently published best-selling book by a French economist provides convincing evidence that our market-based economy lacks any self-regulating mechanism capable of reversing this trend towards ever-increasing inequality. In other words, the market itself won't reverse this trend. It will require something external to the market to do so. We've seen the results of what happens when the very wealthy use their resources to create external forces on the market which benefit their interests. As Christians, have we become so hopeless as to believe that prayer and commitment and collaboration cannot serve as a positive external force on the market? Cannot our church seek justice for the growing number of people living on the margins, as the prophets consistently tell us we are called to do? The representatives you and I have sent to Congress and to our state legislatures are typically the people we think of as being in a position to apply external force to the workings of the market. They, of course, are the ones responsible for adopting the laws which create the framework within which the market operates. Congress has indeed changed the rules. Our lawmakers have chosen, though, to systematically weaken laws which had served in the past to reduce inequality. One would think that since our lawmakers must periodically stand for election, there would have been a price to pay for what has occurred. But one would be wrong for thinking that. Our tax policies represent a particularly glaring case of how Congress has been a major contributor towards increased inequality. It has drastically reduced the income tax rates for high-income Americans from where they stood for most of the 20th century. Tax rates for the highest incomes are now less than half what they once were. Congress has granted particularly favorable treatment for the type of income predominantly earned by wealthy people. Here's what I mean. Typical self-employed people pay a self-employment tax of over 15%. Typical wage earners pay payroll taxes of basically half that rate, while their employers pay the other half. In addition to paying these payroll and self-employment taxes, income taxes are also assessed on wages or self-employment income. Even moderate income workers can quickly find themselves in a 25% marginal tax bracket for income tax purposes. With respect to tax rates, marginal just means the amount of tax someone will have to pay on the next dollar of income that they earn. So, these typical workers are expected to pay out combined payroll and income taxes of over 40% of their income once their earnings reach a certain level. But those who are wealthy enough to rely on investments for capital gain and dividend income pay a marginal tax rate of only 20%. And actually that rate is even less than that, even zero, for people who don't have very high incomes. And no payroll taxes are assessed on this type of income. So if you're wealthy, you're looking at a 20% tax rate at most for your capital gain and dividend income, less than half the 40% rate that moderate income wage earners and self-employed workers are expected to pay. Almost all capital gains are earned by those at the very top of the income heap, even though the number of people who qualify as being at the top of the heap is very small. Take a look at this graph, which was published in 2010 by the Congressional Research Service. It shows the distribution of realized capital gains among American households since 1979. By 2005, the bottom 95% of us in the income distribution received only 10% of capital gains income, while the very wealthy, the richest 1/10%, received 50%. So now we know the rest of the story. Preferential tax rates for capital gains may or may not be good for the economy, but without a doubt, they contribute significantly to increased inequality. And this capital gains story doesn't even end here. Congress has even figured out a way to make sure that a significant portion of the capital gains of wealthy people is never taxed at all. Typically, with huge estates, a majority of the state is comprised of appreciated investments for which capital gains taxes have never been paid. Neither the person who dies while holding such property nor those who inherit the property will ever be required to pay taxes on those gains. Here, we're not just talking about a special low rate of tax. We're talking about no tax at all. This is but one example of the means by which our tax laws have surreptitiously resulted in increasing inequality. Because our tax laws are so complex, it's easy to be surreptitious. Lawmakers face no consequences when average voters just don't understand what is going on. There's still another means that people of high wealth and those who profit from representing their interests can utilize to achieve special tax breaks, and that is simply deceit. When you control the media, it is easy to frame the debate with little need for honesty. For example, many politicians and commentators would have us believe that the estate tax should be completely eliminated, that it is a confiscatory death tax on the families of millions of hardworking farmers and small business people. In reality, this tax is assessed on fewer than 2 out of 1,000 people who die. In 2013, there were fewer than 4,000 estates on which the tax was assessed. And even for those 4,000 estates that were subject to the tax, the average rate they had to pay was less than 17%. This is how our ideologies, our unquestioned acceptance of easy answers, can contribute to growing inequality. We simply don't perceive the need to ask questions. Unfortunately, our state and local taxes, which are usually ignored by the press, also serve to increase inequality. According to the Children's Action Alliance, Arizona's low-income families pay a much larger portion of their income in state and local taxes than do the wealthiest Arizonans. In fact, those whose earnings place them in the bottom 20% of the income distribution pay state and local taxes at nearly 3 times the rate that those in the top 1% of the income distribution do. Yet few people are even aware of this cruel reality. In Arizona, we expect the poor to pay a much higher share of what little earnings they have than we would expect of them if they were wealthy. These statistics pertain to Arizona, but presumably the situation in California and Nevada would not be all that different. By now, I know your ears are tired. Tax talk can't help but do that, but please remember this. Thomas Piketty, a French economist I've already referred to, concludes his recent 577-page book with the following sentence: refusing to deal with numbers rarely serves the interests of the least well-off. Why do we have the laws that favor the most wealthy among us? Perhaps it's because so many of us have not cared sufficiently about the interests of the least well off to be willing to deal with the numbers. We've talked about some of the direct financial consequences that inequality is imposing on our fellow citizens. We've also talked about how the actions of Congress and our state legislatures are making economic inequality even worse. I'd like to briefly mention some indirect ramifications to inequality which have recently come to light. Two British researchers recently presented evidence which shows that an amazing range of social problems are all adversely affected by the high rates of inequality found in the U.S. as well as in the United Kingdom, as compared to continental European nations and to Japan. Evidence shows that this same conclusion can be drawn when looking at state-to-state comparisons within the United States. These researchers found that all of the following measures of social well-being are present in more equal societies: improved mental health, reduced substance abuse, increased life expectancy, decreased infant mortality, reduced rates of obesity, greater educational attainment, lower teenage birth rate, lower incarceration levels, less violence, and greater social mobility. Societies needn't be more affluent to enjoy these benefits. They simply need to be more equal. Inequality is not just destructive to the economy. It corresponds to a vast variety of injustices that we cannot hope to address unless we are willing to undertake the necessary steps to reduce our growing disparities of income, wealth, and opportunity. The British researchers concluded their book with this statement: greater equality is the material foundation on which better social relations are built. Our scriptures assure us that God will not be pleased with you or with me if we fail to help build a foundation enabling us to relate better to one another.